I'd like to introduce Alexa Wright, one of the artists in this project and an esteemed colleague of mine now. Alexa, I should let these people know that you're a professor at the University of Westminster and indeed a very creative one. Alexa.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about some previous works just to give a bit of context to the work that I'm developing for this project, and then hopefully there'll be time to talk a little bit about the research towards this project. So this slide, I'm not actually here to talk about this work really, but I wanted to just flag it up because it's the first real collaboration, kind of recognised and funded collaboration that I did with scientists, which was back in 1997. I'd been working on a medical theme for a few years before that as well. At that time, art-science collaboration was not very common or recognised in the UK, but now it's a very well-established genre there, and I think here perhaps a bit less so. So this project in the Canadian context is perhaps a bit more kind of groundbreaking than it might be if it was being undertaken in Europe even at this time. But this was funded by the Wellcome Trust in London. It was one of their first kind of sci-art commissions in which they were bringing together artists and scientists. And for me, it offered a great opportunity to go and track down some of the country's leading neuroscientists and say, look, I really want to make work about phantom limbs. Would you like to work with me? And there could be a large budget. So, of course, they said yes. But actually, as with much of my work, the collaboration came to be with the people that I was photographing and talking to more than with the scientists. I mean, the project started off out of a kind of 5-hour, very excited conversation between myself, a neurologist, Peter Halligan, and a neuropsychologist. But in the end, it was the 8 people that I photographed that I worked with over a period of time quite closely. And just here, they're all people who've lost limbs, and here I'm using Photoshop to visualise the phantom that he can feel, but none of us can normally see. But I'm not going to go on about that anymore. This is, I have to say, my work takes lots of different forms, so it might seem a bit kind of difficult to assimilate. I work with digitally manipulated photography, sound installation, video, interactive installation. I'm going to show you a range of those things. So this is an audio installation. I mean, this is all you see. Well, there could be up to 8 of these little booths, which are like kind of polling booths or exam booths, so that you, as you sit down in them, you're completely kind of isolated in your own little space. You put on a pair of headphones, and in each booth, you hear a different person telling you, describing the events that led up to them murdering somebody. So obviously not a medical theme, but I've put this in because it sort of talks about how, for me, people's stories, people's narratives are really crucial in my work. And it's also crucial that I sit down with people and talk to them. So there's a kind of, so that, I mean, in this case, I only managed to meet, I went to, sorry, I'm telling this story backwards, but I started writing to prisons in the UK. I had a small research council grant to do this. And eventually, after lots of rejection letters, got a letter from the Home Office telling me to go away and they weren't going to ever let me do this. So I then went to the States and ended up doing it in prisons in Missouri. So I went to a women's prison and a men's prison. And I mainly only managed to meet most people once. So it wasn't, as with lots of the other work, it wasn't about developing a relationship with people. But nevertheless, it was kind of important that I was there witnessing their story. And I'll play you just a tiny clip in a minute. But the point of this is not to be sensationalist, I hope, but that when you know that you're going to sit down and listen to someone telling you about how they murdered somebody, you'll approach them with a certain set of assumptions or perhaps judgments. when you listen to their stories, they're really compelling and you can't help but empathise with them. So as an audience member sitting there in the chair listening to the headphones, you're in a kind of dilemma. And that for me is the work. It's the position I'm putting the person, the audience member in, if you like, so that they become, in a way, an active part of the work. I'll just play you a very short clip from this. I don't know what the volume's going to be like.
Well, I'm one of 5 kids. I'm the oldest boy, but I have a sister that's older than me. My father's a self-made businessman. I saw him work really, really hard to achieve what he achieved. But I was a bad seed for some reason. It seemed like I was caught up in an environment of control. It seemed like I didn't have as many freedoms as maybe the other kids did. I had more strict set of rules on me. And maybe that's just what I use as an excuse to rebel. But I found myself more and more rebellious because I wanted to do things everybody else did. But what I was really doing was things no one else did. This is part I'm really ashamed of. I'm good to be honest and cleanse myself of it. We fell into sort of a satanic thing going on, me and a group of my fellows. And, you know, we just did a bunch of horrible things. And one of those was to commit murder. And
Can you just
I really wish I could do it over again and not do it at all.
Yeah, thanks. That's just to give you a sense of kind of what it's like to hear the person. In a British context, the American voice doesn't work that well. But somehow with this, I wanted to use the actual people's voices. In the work that we're doing here, I'm using people's narratives, but using actors to speak their words. But we'll get onto that in a bit. I'll just move on to the next slide, which again is something slightly different. This was a collaboration, or rather, yeah, kind of a collaboration with Professor Alf Linney at University College London, who I worked with on and off for about 12 years. We made 3 of these big projects together. I have to say that a lot of my work takes 4 or 5 years to make because there's a huge research aspect to it usually. This is, well, the science is computer science really in this piece. It was made in response to a comment that some people made at a conference when we were showing a previous collaborative work, or rather a question that somebody asked, was whether it would ever be possible for humans to have meaningful social interactions with machines. And I kind of like that idea, so I took it literally, or rather we took it literally, and made a kind of virtual character that you can, a disembodied character that you can have a conversation with. So here are 2 people, and there are 2 plinths with sculptures on, so it kind of looks like a gallery space. And here are 2 people interacting with Heather, our virtual character. Each of the plinths has an array of microphones in them, so they're listening to you, and they've got all sorts of technology in them. And then using word recognition, they're picking up on 1 or 2 keywords in what you say, and then the character will respond in a more or less appropriate way. And depending on how people behave with the machine, they get a more or less good conversation. So in a way, we were kind of looking at how how we relate to one another, using computers to talk about how we relate to one another. And we had this, we were using cameras to track people to trigger the system, so that when they walked onto the red carpet, it would trigger the voice. But what this also did was enable us to see the colour that people were wearing sometimes. It wasn't that reliable, but so the voice could say, "Oh, you look nice in green. Do you usually wear green?" And people would be like, "How does she know?" And we had really funny things happen, like guys kind of trying to flirt with her and all sorts of funny things. And then people, one place we presented it, people were looking behind the curtain to see whether there was somebody behind there kind of typing the conversation in. I'll just show you again a little clip. I think, yeah.
Are you an artist? You have such a good sense of style.
I'm not a professional. I'm just an amateur student studying some music in spare time.
Okay. Sorry. I was only asking. Don't take it as an insult. I think artists are pretty cool people, actually.
Oh yes, I think they are great people.
Haven't you heard of the art of conversation?
No, I have not.
Keeping up these conversations can be quite hard work at times. But it depends who I'm talking to, of course. Speak up. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Some people really dress up to come here. Yesterday there was a woman here in an amazing dress. It looked a bit like a wedding dress. It was white and lacy with a long chain.
Well, I'm not wearing a wedding dress.
She was also carrying an overnight bag. I get the feeling you don't believe me.
I do believe you.
I just have to learn to expect the unexpected.
I think you speak in a quite unexpected fashion.
I said I just have to learn to expect the unexpected.
Oh yes.
Do you like surprises?
Yes, I do like surprises.
What really surprises you?
That I think I'm talking to a computer, but the computer can sing. You can. Yeah.
Are you bored with a life with no surprises?
Anyway, so as you can see, this was just somebody we'd never met before, somebody who kind of walked in to use the piece when it was shown as a work in progress. So the audience member becomes a kind of performer in the work and an integral part of the work. I better hurry up. And apparently it's kind of using artificial intelligence, but actually it's really a hugely scripted piece that uses these conversation trees to kind of pick up bits of responses, which I haven't got time to go into now, but anyway. So now, again, for something completely different. This was the last piece of work that I did and finished last year, called A View from Inside. And it was never really a collaboration with the scientists, but it was I was given a kind of honorary fellowship at King's College in the psychiatry department, and I was sort of advised by psychiatrists there. It's a work about psychosis in which I ended up working with 10 people who experienced psychosis either with diagnoses of schizophrenia or bipolar. And it was a year-long project, and I did work with people over a period of time to try to understand what their reality is like when it's not our consensual reality. And I worked visually with people sometimes. I would show them a picture of a room and say, when you're ill, what would be inside the room and what would be outside? And that was really interesting. People came up with all sorts of things that they weren't telling me when we were just working verbally. And then I decided I wanted all of the rooms that they were in to be these kind of ornate 18th century rooms, because the 18th century is all about rationality and order and symmetry, and people's experiences when they're ill are all about irrationality and disorder. So I wanted that kind of containment. And I wanted a window in each room, one or more windows, so that there was an exterior space and an interior space. And then we worked together to come up with motifs for the interior space that would reflect each person's experience. And then we did, I made rough photographs, then we did a photo shoot in situ, and then I worked for a while in Photoshop and continually went back to people and said, well, does this look right? And it was quite a kind of discursive process. Each person would say, yes, that feels right, but it needs a bit more of this. Or, for example, this woman, somehow by mistake, I'd left a cupboard in the middle of the in the middle of that wall under the window, and she's very angry about it. There mustn't be a cupboard there because that wasn't the right kind of feeling to reflect her experience, and I really like that. This woman talked in an interesting way about how she hears voices, and I don't know if you can see in this light, but I tried to represent the voices as these kind of faces coming out of the wallpaper and in the mirrors, these kind of ghostly figures. And she was saying that at one point, as a result of her mental health state of health, she had injured herself and was in a wheelchair. And she said she actually felt much more comfortable at that time because people could see that there was something different about her. Whereas, you know, I would sit across her kitchen table from her and she'd be talking to me about how she was hearing voices and they were there at the moment. But, you know, for me, they were completely impossible, like they were not present and there was no evidence of them at all. So I think that's probably enough of that. And there's a book, which is here if anyone wants to look at it, there's just one copy, that goes with the work, which is really important because it gives a space. It gave a space for each person to say something themselves. So there's a piece of writing by each person along with their photograph in the book. I'll skip that one. So now to what I'm doing here, if I've got time. This has been quite a long project. We had our first meetings, I think, in 2006 with the team. And from the very beginning, I was struck by the image of the heart, the kind of exchange of hearts, the heart being given, somebody's heart being given to somebody else. And that seemed to me to be a very emotional space, but also to be a kind of in itself, but also to be a kind of metaphor for the exchange of hearts in an intimate romantic relationship or in a parent-child relationship. So I wanted to do something with, and I knew I wanted to work with people's narratives, and I wanted to do something where I was kind of juxtaposing the image of the fleshy heart. So I was I spent a while trying to video a heart transplant operation, and I never did get permission for that. But I did video in England, some routine heart surgery. So I was thinking to show images of surgery and then to have these emotional narratives, not from transplant patients, but from people talking about intimate relationships. And I was working on that in Banff in 2010, and it just didn't work. The fleshy images were too graphic. I don't know, it just didn't feel right. So that got thrown out, but the narratives, the idea of the narratives were kept. Then last year when we were in, is that one not going to beat? Oh, yeah. They don't look very good on this screen, but there's a bit more detail in them. Last year when we were in Toronto, Heather very kindly arranged for me to go and photograph some explanted hearts, which I found really beautiful, these kind of inanimate, cold hearts, rather yellow looking. But again, that image in itself was too kind of graphic to use in itself. So I started fiddling around in Photoshop with the explanted heart, and then making little GIFs and thinking about the heartbeat and how disconcerting a different heartbeat might be. And then the idea of the sick heart, the dead heart. So that's just something I'm playing with. I'm also playing with ideas of grafting. Those of you who were at the opening of the exhibition the other day might have seen my little kind of scruffy twig on the floor with a little bit of live branch taped onto it, and then a light so that it's projected onto the wall, and you get this shadow of a huge tree that also looks a bit like a vascular system. So that's something I'm playing with. But the main thing is this sound installation, where there's a mixture. It's an 8-channel sound installation, and it won't look like this. The speakers will be on the walls, and through each speaker, you hear, they're triggered by people as they walk up to them. And through each speaker, you hear either somebody talking about their experience of heart transplant or their experience of an intimate relationship. And I'll just play a few seconds of that and I'll be finished.
I didn't want to talk about it because I was sure I was going to die. Most days I just wore the same clothes because it was too much effort to go to the drawer and get more clothes out.
The feeling was that something that had only recently developed had suddenly been taken away.
In his last email, he said, "You think I'm the person that I'm not." And at the end,
and life
said,
goes on.
Maybe we should just
the
leave it
heart
at that
is at the core of you.
And that was it.
The scar is healed and it's not visible.
That feeling.
So just to say that you can either stand in front of one person and hear more of their narrative, or you can walk around and hear lots of little fragments of narratives. Anyway, I'll just stop. Thank you.